Hello and welcome to the Wednesday live stream. And if it's your first time watching, my name's Craig, and you might be watching live on Twitter because we stream live to Facebook, to YouTube, and today we're streaming live on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, hello. We're
I
we're
didn't know you could stream to Twitter. Does that not mean we'll only be cut to 25 words or whatever it is you have?
I have no idea, Lynn. We're experimenting today. We're living outside the comfort zone.
We
So
are.
if you are watching live, welcome. And if you're watching on the replay after the fact, welcome too, if this is your first time watching. So if you haven't seen us before, we're here to help you improve your English. And my name's Craig. And if you are interested in improving your fluency, if you feel you need more confidence in your speaking, the first thing I'd like to say is that I'm very soon starting a new conversation course. And on the conversation course, the focus is on your speaking. And we do role plays, we do discussions, we do debates, and as much speaking time as possible. So if this kind of thing interests you, if you'd like to connect with me and a small group of motivated students, send me an email to to teachers@mansioningles.com. And in a second, I'll show you the email address and I will send you more information. Now, it's always a pleasure to do these live streams with my good friend Lynn, who's over there on my left, I think. Hello, Lynn. Welcome.
Well, you're that way, aren't you? Yes. Hi, my name is Lynn. My website, I'm also an English teacher, but I'm an online English teacher. And my website is putitlikethis.com. And I specialize in making tailor-made courses for students. So we try to create a course, or I try to create a course for you that specifically goes with your objectives. So people have many different objectives. Maybe you're a teacher who wants to improve fluency. Maybe you are a business person who wants to improve your presentation skills or your negotiation skills. Maybe you're somebody who's preparing for an English exam and you want to maximize your score and you need some help with exam techniques and fluency. There's lots of different reasons why you might want to come to me. Some people come just exclusively for writing. If you go to putitlikethis.com, you can see a selection of things that I do, and you can contact me and then we can discuss it as well. Okay.
Okay, and if you are watching live, please say hi and tell us where you're from, where you are at the moment. We'd love to hear what part of the world you're in. And this week, we're focusing on something that we spoke about a while ago. This is episode 2 of manners.
Because we can't get enough.
Because we're British, we like to speak about good manners and bad manners. So that's the topic today.
Yeah. And we have some people joining us already, and I know both of them. Hello, Hema, first of all. I think we'll have to give you a prize because you're always the first one to come and say hello. And also Concha. So both of them are from Madrid, I think. Hello, Concha.
Yes.
Nice to see you
Hi, Concha. Hi,
joining
Hema.
us as well. And Hema too, from Madrid, I believe, both of them. Yeah.
And I know Hema and Concha both have very good manners. So I'll be surprised if they learn anything new today where as far as manners are concerned, but we'll try and teach you some new vocabulary and speak about some situations. But please comment in the chat whatever we say. If you disagree, if you have an opinion, let us know, and it'll be interesting to see what you think about this topic of manners.
And I also have to say, normally our primary aim is not to teach you anything about the content. I wouldn't presume to be an expert in manners, But the thing that you can gain by watching Craig and I talk is that you're having a kind of unique opportunity to listen to two native speakers talking to each other at normal speed. We try to speak at normal speed. We might go a little bit slowly occasionally when but we're kind of aware of the types of vocabulary that might cause you difficulty, and then we slow down and we'll explain the vocabulary for you. But what you should be doing when you listen to us is try to notice, as well as trying to follow what we're saying, try to notice the way we say things. Sometimes you might find a couple of expressions and think, oh, I like the way they do that. And then you can maybe try to imitate us when you speak yourself, because
Uh,
that's the way we really learn language. We imitate others. Children imitate their parents, and you need to imitate the kind of models in English that you like to imitate. Of course, if you don't really like the way Craig and I speak, you're always at liberty to imitate Audrey Hepburn, for example, or who would you like to be, Craig?
Who would I like to be?
Yeah, who would
Oh,
you
that's
like to be? Should I
Christian
say
Bale. Did
Christian
you
Bale?
did
Okay, I
you
was
know
going to
that
say
Christian
George Clooney,
Bale?
but
Did you know
Christian
that
Bale.
Christian Bale's originally British? He was born in the UK. I
Is
did
he
not know
really?
that.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Mhm.
Um,
Well,
but
Audrey Hepburn is American, isn't she? But isn't she? She's American, isn't she, Audrey Hepburn?
do we have to Google it?
I'm not sure. Anyway, it wasn't really for her. Well, I love her accent. I think she speaks beautifully when she speaks English, Audrey Hepburn. But I have
Uh,
seen her acting with with British accents and with American accents. I'm not 100% sure if she's really American or British.
She's Belgium.
Oh, she's Belgian. Look at that.
Yep.
Well, I'm a quarter Belgian, so maybe that's the attraction. Actually, she also looks $1 million, or doesn't she?
Well,
So
she used to. Yeah.
she used to, of course. She's much older than me.
Buonasera, Roberta, joining us from Italy. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us today to look at the
Mm-hmm.
topic of manners.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we spoke about manners last time, which I think was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we
Mm-hmm.
did show you some expressions for when you don't like something, when you really not well hate, yes, but when something really you really don't
Mm-hmm.
like it, negative expressions. Can you remember any expressions for disliking things? If you
Mm-hmm.
can, write them in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
and in a second we'll show you some expressions you can use when you dislike bad manners, for example.
Or when something annoys you, how do you express your annoyance? Mm-hmm.
So should we just tell them? I think let's
Maybe.
just show you, because
Okay.
you're not typing. We need
Oh,
your
nobody's typing. Yeah,
comments.
you can see that,
Nobody's
can you?
typing. Come on, Gemma. Come on,
Okay.
Concha. Let us know what you think. Here we are. I
Oh, there
can't
we are. Concha's got
stand it.
one. Well done. Well done,
I can't
Concha.
stand it when Lynn and I go live and nobody comments in the chat. I hate it when we think we're speaking on the microphone and nobody's listening. It really gets on my nerves when
Well,
nobody
but
comments.
that's because some people log in, but they don't say hello on the chat, don't they? So we know that more people are logged in. But I have to say, hey, Matt and Concha and Roberta tonight, you're perfect manners because you've all said hello to us. So that's lovely.
Concha remembers. Concha says, I can't stand it. Thank
Yeah, I
you. Thank
saw
you.
she got
Yep.
that one. And actually, I was teaching another one this morning to another student of mine, which we didn't put down there, but it's a very common one. When something annoys you, you can say, I wish they wouldn't. So you use the expression I wish, and then you use the word would. I wish they wouldn't, or I wish they would say hello to us. And this idea of wish and would expresses that you're slightly annoyed at things.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Roberta has also got a new one, which is great. We didn't have that where. And she said, I can't bear it. Can you see that, Craig? Maybe you want to flash that up.
That hasn't come up for me. I don't know why. I
Oh,
can't
has it
see that
not?
comment.
Okay, it was after Conscious. I can't stand it. And she said, I can't bear it, Roberta. Uh-huh.
Oh
Mhm.
yes, here it is. I'm sorry,
Ah,
Roberta.
you got it.
Yeah,
Yeah, there
I
you
can't
go.
bear it. Yeah,
I can't bear it. Uh-huh.
I like
Okay.
conchas. It grinds my gears.
Did you teach her that one? I don't think I taught her that one. Did you? I
Maybe
don't.
I
Maybe where
don't
have you got
know.
that from, Concha? But it's nice. It grinds
She's
my
got
gears
a
because
very
the
good
gears
memory.
are what you have in the car, and the grinding is when you don't change gear properly, and it goes. It makes that horrible noise, doesn't it? When you haven't got the gear in position properly, which
It
means
gets
it's
my
very
goat
annoying.
is
It
another
gets
one.
my goat is another one. Uh-huh. There you are. So we've got some new ones for episode 2 of Manners, haven't we? Mhm.
And also, you should or you shouldn't. Obviously, the negative, you ought to or you oughtn't to, which is not that
Mhm.
common. You're
Mhm.
supposed to, and you must
Mhm.
for strong obligation.
Mhm. So all of those modals are when you think you know how it should be done. You know it better, and you want to remind people of it. Okay, so shall we move on to our situations then now? Oh,
Well,
that was
yeah,
more vocabulary, wasn't it? Sorry.
yeah, we got
So,
good manners, obviously
mhm,
bad manners. If you have good manners, then you are a well-mannered person. So
mhm,
well-mannered becomes the adjective or well-behaved. Your children are very well behaved.
mhm,
Be careful of the opposite of polite. The prefix is im.
mhm,
So impolite, not un. I hear that mistake a lot. That's
mhm.
very impolite of you to say that, and to be rude and to be inconsiderate.
And inconsiderate is another one that you have to remember because some people say unconsiderate, but it's inconsiderate and it's impolite. So one with im and the other one with in. Mhm. Okay.
Exactly. So the first question, in which situations are manners important? And this is where we would like you to tell us what you think.
Mhm.
If you think of public situations where you are with other people, what gets your goat? What grinds your gears? In which situations do you think it's important to be well mannered? Let us know. Type
Mhm.
something in the chat and we'll discuss it.
Mhm. Now, some of the areas we did already cover in the last class. So we don't want to hear about queuing or phone manners, office etiquette. We did those 3 areas in our previous class. So if you can have any situations that are not to do with that, that would be great. Mhm. We have some, if you don't, but we have some too. While you're thinking, maybe we should start with one, Craig, because sometimes, Roberta's got one in a job interview.
Yeah,
Manners in a job interview. Mm,
quite a formal situation.
yeah, that is. Well, I think, shall I start? Because I have some views on that one. I think it's very important in a job interview to be aware of the culture in which you're in. Because, of course, if you're in a job interview in Britain, maybe there are certain manners which are not quite the same in Germany, for example, if you're having the job interview in Germany, or if you're having the job interview in Spain or in America. Mm. I think probably common to all of them is that the situation in a job interview is going to be slightly more formal than it's not going to be an informal situation. It's usually a more formal situation where you go to a job interview. But for example, there are some things that might be different. I think really we should talk about British job interviews because that's where we know the
Yeah,
most. Would you agree?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're in a British job interview, I think it's very good manners to shake hands with the interviewer when you go into the room.
Don't kiss the interviewer, as
Absolutely.
in Spain. Sometimes it's common when you're introduced to people for the first time on the cheek. No,
Uh,
don't do that if you go to an interview in the UK.
no.
That's that's not acceptable. So
Uh-huh.
shake hands, whether you're a man or a woman, and just
Uh-huh.
say nice to meet you. Actually,
Yes.
what's interesting, I went to a bank today and I
Mm-hmm.
was introduced to a lady who was the director of the bank, and immediately she extended her hand. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, in formal situations in Spain,
They
as
do.
in the
I don't think
UK,
they
yeah,
kiss.
they
Uh-huh.
don't. Yeah, I wasn't going to
No.
kiss her. No, you
No.
shake
Uh-huh.
hands.
Yeah, they shake hands. Another important thing I think in a British context is to say your first and your last name. Yeah.
Mm.
So when you introduce yourself, you say, "Hi, I'm Lynne Copperly," or and this is Craig Wheeland. I think it's important to say your first and your last name. When you say your first name in English, it gives a sense of informality. Mhm.
Yeah.
And it would be too formal if you just say, "I am Mrs. Copperly." That would be too much, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So I think in British English we tend to use this more intermediate. So you would say your full name, your first name, and your surname. Mhm.
There's one question we've got here that is a little different from going away from job interviews, and that's manners
Mhm.
when speaking to the elderly versus the young.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think about that in the UK from a British perspective? Do you change formality if you're speaking to an older person? Because obviously in Spain you'd use usted,
Mhm.
but in the UK I think we'd also defer to the older person and we would be more polite and we would use more polite language.
Yeah, and I think we generally be more formal. So one way to defer to the older people is to actually be more formal. Yeah. So, um, especially like in the interview situation, for example, there could be occasions where if you're in a job interview for a position in a bar behind a bar and you go to the bar and you meet the manager and it's a very informal place for young people and there's a disco, probably for that job interview, you wouldn't be saying, "My name is Lynne Copley," and shaking hands. You might put your hand out and you say, "Hi, I'm Lynn." And then you might say, "Lynne Copley." But you would try to make it a little bit less formal by first giving your first name and then adding your second name as an additional information. But if you were in a more formal interview, for example, for the position of a bank director, you would definitely come in and say, "My name is Lynne Copperly." And you'd
Yes.
probably put more emphasis on the surname.
And I think one thing that's interesting is that as I've gotten older,
Hmm.
I tend to be a lot more informal, even in formal situations. And I think that's got a
Hmm.
lot to do with age. When I was younger and young people, I think they should, if you're in doubt, be more formal.
Hmm.
But the older I get, the more I tend to be informal, even in formal situations. Do you
Hmm.
find that or not?
A little bit, but I think that's because if young people deal with me now, if they deal with me more formally, I feel I have the power to set the tone. So maybe I want to make them feel more comfortable, and then I say, "Oh, you can call me Lynn," and that gives them permission to reduce the formality. I think. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
If I say, if I'm the older one and I say, "Oh, call me Lynn," okay. But for example, if it's the other way around, which for me and you isn't anymore because we're not that young anymore, but if we were the young ones, you can't do that. You have to wait on and you have to judge the signal that you're getting from the older person and then you have to imitate again. So it's about, I think when you're older, you have a little bit more power in those situations than when you're
Yeah,
younger. Mhm.
definitely. You have to
And this
read the
is
room.
yeah, you have to, yeah, read the room is the expression. You have to look at the room and then take the signals coming from the room. And also, this is an interesting point as well when we talk about formality, informality with manners, is that, of course, in many languages, like in Spanish, in German, in French, there are actually actual sort of grammatical cues for formality. So in English, well, certainly in French, German, and Spanish, and Italian, I presume, there are two pronouns for the pronoun you. There is the formal one and the one that's more informal. And I know from my experience teaching Germans and Spanish people and French people too, that sometimes you guys, if you're French, German, or Spanish, you misinterpret English. You think that English is all informal because we only have one you, and that is not the case at all. Right? We express the formality with different linguistic signals. And a linguistic signal is like that kind of thing where I say, my name is Lynne Copperly. That might be less formal. If I say, my name is Lynne Copperly, that might be more formal. And if I say, my name is Lynne Copperly, but you can call me Lynne, I'm giving you the cue that we can drop the formality. So it's those kind of things, isn't it? I think we have other grammatical cues. For example, and this is very related again to the job interviews, things like in English, direct questions and indirect questions. So remember, a direct question is, what time is it? Or how much do you pay in a job interview? Or when can I start? Or who do I report to? Now, all of those examples of questions are direct questions, and they are very informal because they are direct. You have to know somebody very well to be able to say, what time do I start? Who do I report to? How much do you pay? And when can I start?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you agree. So if you've been working with somebody for a long time and you have a good relationship, you could use a direct question. Maybe if you're in that very informal job interview in the bar with the disco and you're all super cool and the person's the same age as you and you're saying, well, when can I start? That's a very informal vibe. And you express that informal vibe with the direct questions. If you're in a formal situation, you need those indirect questions. Could you tell me when I can start? Would it be possible to give me an idea of the salary? Okay, that's an indirect question.
I was wondering what the starting salary would be.
It would be, and do you mind if I let you know in tomorrow about whether I want the job or not? Do you mind if? Okay, all of those are indirect questions and they express formality. If the interviewer starts asking you questions, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? That cue is telling you this is going to be a formal interview. If the interviewer says to you, tell me about yourself, yeah, he's inviting you to be a little bit less formal. So it's more complex, isn't it, in English? We don't have those words like usted or tú, which would probably signal it more clearly in Spanish, for example, or in German with sie and du, or tú and vous in French. But we signal it with other ways in the grammar, also with more formal vocabulary rather than informal vocabulary. Remember, English has a very rich vocabulary. It's got the French rooted Latin vocabulary, and it's got the Saxon phrasal verb vocabulary. And the phrasal verbs are the informal spoken vocabulary, and the Latin equivalent of those same verbs are more formal verbs. Could you indicate to me when you might be able to start? Could you let me know when you can start?
When can you start?
When can you start? Right? Start versus commence. We
Yeah.
have two words, yeah. And there's a whole range of language there that signals formality and informality in a way that maybe doesn't exist in other languages.
Yeah, a very good point. So to summarize, you really have to wait and see how you're being spoken to and then adapt your language accordingly, especially
Mm-hmm.
in a situation like a job interview. You have to mirror the
Mm-hmm.
formality or informality of the person you're speaking to. So you really need to know formal English and
Mm-hmm.
informal English. But it's not only language that's important
Uh-huh.
when we think about manners. It's also the way you come across, it's the way you
Mm-hmm.
appear to people, and that often reflects itself in the way you dress.
Yes, that's true. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because would it influence you if you went into an interview and the person was in a suit and tie? You would probably speak more formally, whereas if the person was in a t-shirt and you're being interviewed for a tech position in IT, then you'd
Mm-hmm.
probably behave very differently, I
That's
think.
true. I think that that's true. But I'm also going to say, if you're speaking to strangers, for example, in the street, right? Let me give you an example here. Imagine somebody who is a punk rocker, or nowadays punk
Going
rockers are
back
from
to the
our. We're going back to the
we go
80s,
back to the
aren't we?
70s now.
Who? What would they be? A hipster? A hipster is a.
Right, don't
Well,
look at me, Lynn. I've got no idea what people listen to these days as far as music's
well, you
concerned.
know what I
I
mean.
think
If you
Concha
if
would probably know,
Concha might know more, right? So
or Gemma,
somebody who is young, like in the young culture.
someone who's hip,
A
cool, with it,
hip, cool, trendy.
in the
The
groove,
the young people who the boys wear their trousers down at their knees and they
down their
show that,
arse. Yeah.
those kind of people, right? Well, imagine there's a group of them in the street, and then there's somebody like me or Craig coming along, and we want to ask them what the time is. Yeah.
What would you say?
I would still say, could you tell me what time it is, please?
I wouldn't.
And you wouldn't. You'd say,
No,
what's the time?
I'd
Would you
say
say, what's the time to a
sorry,
stranger?
sorry, mate. If you got the time, I'd be
But you
really
would say,
informal.
sorry, mate, indirect.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
you'd say,
yeah.
have you got the time? But you wouldn't say, what's the time? Would
No,
you?
no.
No, because that's bad manners. Uh-huh.
Yep. Good
Yeah.
point. Good
Yeah.
point.
So, I mean, I think it's okay to read clothes maybe in a job interview because they are very clear signals of whether it's going to be formal or informal. But don't make the mistake of trying to read clothes outside because you still have to treat people with respect. We expect manners to be slightly less direct with strangers. Would you think?
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
that's definitely true. Let's change gears a bit and not grind gears, Concha. Let's change gears and talk about another aspect of manners. Now, how would you feel if you saw people kissing in public in your country, in your culture? Is that acceptable to see people? There's an informal word which is to snog.
I was glad I
SNOG.
wrote that down. I thought we
Snogging. Did
have
you
to
write it
teach them
down?
snogging. We have to teach them snogging.
I will write that in the chat. So snog is when your tongue is halfway down their throat and you're kissing passionately in a public space. Is that good? Is that acceptable where you live in your culture?
I'm
What do
glad
you
you used
think,
the word
Lynn?
acceptable. I thought you were going to ask me, is it good? And I would say it sounds it. Sounds like that could be quite enjoyable, but maybe not in public.
Well, I know in
But you
Asia
mean, is it acceptable? Yeah,
I
it's
know in
not really
Asia
acceptable, is
it's
it?
not good manners. So I'm just curious to know
Mm-hmm.
if what it's like if you're watching in Latin America or in even in
Mm-hmm.
European countries. If you
Mm-hmm.
see young people, it is usually young people. Actually, you don't see
Mm-hmm.
people over 40 doing it, but young people who don't often have their own place to go and kiss their partner. Does it offend you to see
Mm-hmm.
kissing in public? Is that bad manners in your opinion? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. In my opinion, it is. And I see a lot of that going on at the beach now. When you go to the beach in Valencia and you're sitting down with your family, um, I find it quite disturbing when there are couples around and they're doing a lot more than snogging.
A lot more than snogging.
They
A lot.
are. They're
Okay.
not just kissing, but and because they're sort of they haven't got a lot of clothes on them to start with, because you're on the beach and you're in swimming costumes. I find it a little bit offensive personally, but maybe I'm old fashioned. But it's like, I don't need to see that. Can you do that in private? you know, it's not that I'm prudish that they're having a nice time. They're obviously having a nice time. But it's like, I don't know, it's sort of a more intimate thing. Um, I mean, I don't mind seeing people kissing as long as they're not snogging. Snogging makes other people feel uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm just making a note of what you said. Prudish, to be a prude.
Hmm.
That's an interesting word. Yeah. How would you describe to be a prude? You maybe old-fashioned values
Uh-huh. Not
that are
very
outdated, perhaps.
prudish.
Prudish.
Uh-huh. Or does it mean that you're not very liberal, you're not very open-minded, maybe, to be prudish? Uh-huh. Old-fashioned. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Old-fashioned. Yeah.
A little bit inhibited, maybe. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like you've got lots of inhibitions, isn't it? Uh-huh. Like maybe to do with sex, and yeah, it's mostly to do with sex, isn't it, really? It's
Yeah.
your attitude to sex, really.
But often, if I'm by myself, it doesn't bother me. But if I'm with, like, for example, if I were with older people or friends, and I thought it might be affecting them, I would feel bad for them. But personally,
Hmm.
it wouldn't. I don't think it would bother me
It
if
doesn't
I was
bother you so
alone.
much. Uh-huh.
Not really.
So you're not a prude, but obviously I
Hopefully,
am. Sorry. So if you see me at the beach, don't do that near me, will you
going
not,
like
please?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise I might get up and leave, and you lose your opportunity to talk to me in English. Yeah, yeah, but it's a bit. It's true that there are some countries where it's not allowed. Hmm. And
Definitely not.
I don't mind kissing in public. I kiss my husband sometimes in public, but we don't snog in public. Mhm.
Yeah, snogging is taking
Mhm.
it to the next level.
It's the next level. Mhm.
Another,
Petting is another word. I think we had
yes,
that once before on another podcast, on another
about pets.
maybe no, we didn't talk about pets last week, but there is a word, petting, petting, and petting is when, how would you describe petting? Petting is when people um, keep touching each other in an intimate sexual way in public. And there used to be signs when I was a little girl. There used to be signs in the public swimming pools, which used to have little signs, and it used to say no running, no shouting, no eating, no drinking. So it was like a pictogram of a sign. And then there was one which said no petting when I was a little girl. Can you remember that at the public swimming
I
pools?
we didn't have that sign, but I could imagine
Did you
it being
not?
there. No, no, we
Oh,
didn't.
well, no, definitely. It was on the sign for the rules of the swimming pool.
Of the
So you
swimming
weren't
pool.
allowed, you weren't, if you kissing was petting, touching was petting, stroking was petting,
Okay.
hugging in the water, that was not allowed in the public swimming pools when I was a girl. I don't know whether it is now.
The definition I have from Google is to engage in sexually stimulating caressing and touching.
Yeah,
That's
that's
petting.
a good definition of petting. Uh-huh. Hmm.
Okay, let's move on then. Talking about manners
Nobody's
online.
told us what you
No,
think, though,
I know.
about
Yeah,
kissing in public.
I
Come on,
don't.
tell us.
I don't think you really care. Obviously, if you haven't commented, os da igual. It doesn't matter. It's like it doesn't bother you if people
Uh-huh.
kiss in front of you. Online etiquette, though. What about online? Have you ever been insulted online? And what is bad manners, or what are bad
Mm.
manners online? And does it depend on the platform you're on? For example, here we're among friends, everybody's being polite. But maybe if you go on Twitter, which can be very insulting at times, I've experienced bad manners on Twitter
Hmm.
very often. What do you think about that? Have you ever
Is that because,
experienced bad manners?
and on Twitter, is it because, do you think it's because you're limited to how long your sentences can be? No?
No, I don't. I don't think it is. I think it's complicated. I think one aspect is it's kind of like bad manners when you're in a car and you feel like you're protected in the car, and
Ah,
whatever you say or do in the car, you're not face to face with another person, so it doesn't really matter what you say or do.
mm-hmm,
Your comments and your attitude doesn't have immediate repercussions. You're not in front of the person you're
mm-hmm,
insulting. And another thing is the fact that, well, yes, people aren't, they're not really connected as they would be face to face in person.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
it's much easier to be bad mannered on social networks. And Twitter is mainly text, so you can say what
mm-hmm,
you want. I think it's more difficult on Instagram because you're generally posting photos, not
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
commenting that much.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what? Let us know what you think. Have you experienced bad manners on any social platform, and also on Facebook? You're in groups very often these days on Facebook, and if you're in a group, you might know the people in the group. You're more aware of being in a group, and when people are in communities and groups, they're more careful about what they say because there's
Mm-hmm.
social judgment.
Mhm. Sometimes I notice that I sometimes have a, how can I say, I get offended a little bit when with WhatsApp, WhatsApp, the messaging, because I don't really use the other social media, but with WhatsApp, I use it a lot. And sometimes when people message me on WhatsApp that I haven't had regular conversations with for many months. And when they message me with a direct question like, I need this, or give me this, or can you tell me this? And
Yeah.
they don't say, hi, how are you? It's been a long time. When they don't have that introductory greeting, if I haven't had contact with them for a long time, then I have to say it does bother me a little bit. I feel a little bit offended. It's the same with email, if somebody hasn't emailed me in months and months, and or even just in a week, but if they want something from me and they don't just say, hi, how are you doing, or how are you, I have a question, could you help me? But if they don't say anything nice to me, that kind of formality in language, in written communication that used to be in letters, because like in letters you always start with a reference and then you finish with a greeting. You have a greeting and then you have an ending. That has kind of disappeared, hasn't it, on WhatsApp? And I notice
Not only
increasingly that
on
young
WhatsApp,
people
on
don't do
many
it very
platforms,
much on many platforms,
on many
and that
platforms.
that does bother me personally.
Yeah,
I
it's a different way of communicating, and
Yes, it's too direct for me. It's too direct for me. I mean,
I'm
it's different. Like, what if we're in a chain of emails, yeah, and like, so I've sent an email to somebody, and then they've replied to me, and I've had to reply to them. When you're in a chain that's still running, then I think it's perfectly acceptable to answer with yes, no, uh-huh, can you do it? Okay. And you don't have to bother with lots of love and how yeah. But when you're beginning a chain, I think there's some level of formality that I need in that.
But just think of the way communications changed from writing letters back in the
Mm-hmm.
day just to email, because we used to start letters by saying, I hope this letter finds you well, or
Mm-hmm.
how are you doing? It's been a long time since we've been in touch. The kind of things we teach students to write when they're writing a letter for Cambridge, for example, which
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
really outdated. But these
Mhm.
days, you usually start an email with "Hi," and then you say what you want. So
Mhm.
I think communication's just changing,
Mhm.
and to some extent, I agree with you. But then again, we have to adapt to the way
Yes.
people are
Uh-huh.
communicating these
Mhm.
days, and
Mhm.
the messaging is becoming short and it's
Mhm.
becoming more focused.
But it's
Conscious
easy
says
to get offended, isn't it? It's when you
because we're coming
reduce
from a
the
different
words.
time, though.
No, but
Because
if you reduce the words, then there's a lot of ambiguity in them. When you use
um,
more words, there's less ambiguity.
if you don't know the person. But if you
Mhm.
know the
Yes. Uh-huh.
person, I'm a lot more accepting of it. And if I
Yeah,
get
of
a
course.
message that says, "Are you around at the end of May? I want to come and visit you," and it's somebody I
Mhm.
know, it
Mhm.
wouldn't bother me that they didn't start the message with, "Hi, Craig, I hope you're feeling well." That wouldn't bother me.
Aha,
If
no, that
it's a
wouldn't have.
stranger,
Mhm.
yes, that would bother me, of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
Conscious says insulting online is unacceptable. Yes, I think
Mhm.
most people would agree with that. And Roberta
Mhm.
says cyberbullying is,
Mhm.
um, yeah, a serious problem. And
Yeah.
Hema says, I believe if you don't
Mhm.
agree with a comment, you just ignore it, but don't get insulted. Don't become
Mhm. Mhm.
insulted by it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's certainly true in social media. I agree with Hima because it's not directed to you personally. So there's no reason to take insult, is there? Usually you take offense if something is directed personally to you. Yeah. Although, okay, it is true that there are comments that are offensive that might not affect you, but they might affect the group as a
Yeah.
whole. Yeah, I suppose so. Hmm.
Yeah.
But I don't think you should get involved in hating back. I think insults beget insults. There is a word beget, which means that they give rise to more insults. So, of course, if somebody's been insulting and they are responded to, sometimes it just creates a chain and it generates more. Sometimes silence, as Hema recognizes, can be more powerful, I think.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Let's move on to another area of manners, and that's personal space. How close is too close? And I can remember coming to Spain being very surprised by how the personal space was reduced when
Hmm.
somebody's standing next to you or touching you or putting their arm around you. That doesn't often happen in the UK. At least it didn't when I lived there. There is
Mhm, mhm,
more respect of personal space in the UK. You keep your distance,
mhm,
and in Spain, and I guess Italy as well. Um, that let us know, Roberta, how it is in Italy. But it's much more acceptable to be closer to the person you're
mhm,
talking to,
mhm,
even if you don't have a close relationship with them. You're just going to be more
mhm,
touchy feely. You're going to be more in their personal space.
mhm. And also in with strangers as well, not just with people that you know, but with strangers too. And I remember when I lived in Germany. In Germany, the space is even greater actually than in England.
Really?
And yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, you really have to keep it's a matter of centimeters, but we're aware of it. We notice it. That it's astonishing the ability of the human to sort of recognize that. But I was aware that in Germany you have to stand a little bit further away. In
Hmm.
England, it's a little bit closer, and then in Spain, it's even closer. Uh-huh. But
Interesting.
again, it's like what we said before. It's about reading the room. When you go to another culture, you need to look and notice what other people are doing, and you imitate. Yeah, you imitate the space. You let them take the lead. You mimic their language. You mimic their behavior. Yeah, and
I can remember a couple of incidents. I won't give you details, but where British people on two occasions, because of a aggressive situation, they came very, very close to me, almost
mhm,
touching my face, speaking to me this close, and that made me really, really uncomfortable. I
mhm,
wanted to take a step back, and they were literally here in my face because they were very angry.
mhm,
Um, and they were quite formal situations as well. They were work situations, which was surprising.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how invading somebody else's personal space can really make you uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
if you're not used to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. Uh-huh. And also touching. Touching is also a thing, about, like, I mean, Spanish people do, they hug, or you pat somebody on the back, or you touch somebody on the shoulder. That's more acceptable in Spain, but in England it isn't, and people feel quite uncomfortable. You shouldn't really touch people in England if you don't know them, I think. Would you agree?
If you don't know them,
If you don't
definitely.
know them, and even in a work situation, if it's not a close work colleague, if it's not a if you haven't got a friendship, but it's just a working relationship, you can't put your hand on somebody's back while you're talking to them.
No, it's a power move.
Uh-huh.
And if you
Yeah.
notice, politicians do that often when they're ready for photo shoots. If two presidents are meeting, there's almost a fight between the two for one to put the arm on the other one's
Around the
shoulder,
other.
or
Exactly.
when they're moving through a door to guide their back with their
Mm-hmm.
hand. And that's a power move. And if you watch
Mm-hmm.
closely on the news, you'll see that happening very, very often. When
Mm-hmm.
two world leaders meet, there's this dynamic, this physical
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. Who is the boss? Who is in control here? And that manifests itself by the hand gestures on the shoulders on
And it's that used to be the case. It still is, of course, to a certain degree, but years ago that used to be very clearly the case with sexism between men and women. Yeah, I mean, men used to touch. It was perfectly acceptable in Britain too for men to touch women at work, and now it is definitely not.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like ushering people through doors, opening the doors for a woman and then pushing the woman through first. You've got to be very careful with that as a
Exactly.
man in Britain now. I suppose you have to maybe opening the door and offering that somebody goes first is polite and well mannered, but pushing them through the door with your hand is not. So you shouldn't. You should offer, that they go through. And if the woman then says no, go ahead, you should go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Although speaking of body language, I like this topic a lot. I'm a big fan of body language. When you do start to create a rapport with somebody
Mm-hmm.
in English, in any language, and you start to feel comfortable with them, and maybe the situation is not as formal as the first introduction and the first meeting, just gently touching somebody on the arm or on the elbow does
Mm-hmm.
create a sense of intimacy and
Mm-hmm.
closeness. Now, you have to be careful, but I think it's a very useful technique.
It is. And
Just
touching
as you're
someone on the
talking,
shoulder is a good place to touch too, just very briefly.
yeah.
Patting somebody on the shoulder. Uh-huh.
Don't grab them, don't hug them. Just a light, just a light touch.
Little light touch. Uh-huh.
Does kind of
Uh-huh.
break the ice a little and get you a little bit
Uh-huh.
help to build a relationship and get a bit closer.
Yeah. I think it sends the message, I see
I
you.
like you.
Well,
Yes.
not just I like you, but I see you. I see you as a human being. I'm not uh, looking beyond. And that was something else that we wanted to talk about, is about manners, is about staring, because eye contact is also a very important aspect of that, isn't it?
Yes.
Staring, if you're not familiar with the word, is when you maintain eye contact without blinking.
Mirar fijamente if you're a Spanish speaker.
Yeah, so no blinking. You have to, and staring can be very intimidating.
Yes.
So it can be quite aggressive. However, in English, it is also very rude, I think. And this will go back to the job interviews for Roberta. You have to keep eye contact with people when you're speaking to them. If you speak and you do not maintain eye contact, that also is a little bit rude in English. Would you agree?
It's very subtle, isn't it? You need to
Uh-huh.
make eye contact, and I'm trying to do that here with the webcam, with the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, if you have an interview in English and you are using a webcam, don't look down all the time. Make sure occasionally you look into the person's eyes. But it's very subtle. And I noticed, for example, here in Spain, it's not as strict. I can look at people, almost stare at people, and it's not offensive. Whereas in the UK, I
Mm-hmm.
might get into a fight, a physical fight, if I stare at another man for more than a second on the street. And it
Uh-huh.
happened to me. It happened to me once.
Did it?
I was walking down a road, looking at somebody, as I would do in Spain,
Uh-huh.
just looking at them because I was curious. And the guy was obviously in a bad mood, or I don't know if he'd been drinking. I don't know, but he said, "What are you looking at?" in a very, very aggressive way. And
Mm-hmm.
immediately I just looked down to the ground and carried on walking. It depends what area of the UK you're in. But if you're a guy, especially, just be
Mm-hmm.
careful who you're staring at. It's not the same. The amount of time that you make eye contact with somebody in England can be
Mm-hmm.
quite dangerous.
And there are
It can be
places
misread as aggression. It can
it
be
can.
misread as aggression.
And I think there are places where it's not acceptable to stare. For example, in public transport, if you're sitting on the underground or the metro, you can't be staring at people. Everybody pretends to be looking at something else. Of course, it's wonderful now because everybody's got their smartphone. So you can always put your eyes on your
Yeah,
smartphone, and
used to
that's
be the
perfectly
newspaper. Now
acceptable.
it's a phone.
Used to
Yeah,
be the newspaper, now it's the smartphone. And if you haven't got anything, you have to look at the floor. But
yeah.
you've got to be very careful about catching eye contact with strangers on the tube, because it is considered a little bit like rude. And I remember when I was young, my mum used to say, "Stop staring, it's rude. It's rude to stare." Because as little kids, did you can you remember that as a little
Yeah.
kid? You know, you would go and you'd start looking at
That's
adults and
curious.
staring at them.
Curiosity.
It was
Curiosity.
curiosity. And my mum used to say, "It's rude to stare, it's rude to stare." So that you were taught as a child not to stare, I think. Uh-huh.
Absolutely. Going back to what we said before, Hema says, "I believe if you don't agree, remember, agree is a verb. So the negative of I agree is I don't agree. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in agreement, if you want to use the noun. With a comment, you just ignore it, but you don't insult anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just ignoring it is very powerful. You need sometimes a lot of self-discipline not to reply and not to get angry
Mm-hmm.
and not to respond, but it's very powerful just to ignore it, because what people want sometimes is confrontation, and they agitate you and they insult you and they try and get you into an argument, and the best response sometimes is just
Mm-hmm.
whatever, just ignore them. And
Mm-hmm.
Claudia says it's not rude, but it's not the right manner, or maybe not the
Ah,
right
okay.
way,
Mm-hmm.
or not
And where are
correct.
you from, Claudia? Are you from South America or from Spain or Italy? I'm not sure. Uh-huh.
Maleja's from Colombia, and she said, yeah, it's
Ah,
rude.
okay.
It's
It's rude
rude
too
in
in
Colombia.
Colombia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh-huh. All right. So staring.
Staring, yeah. And we spoke
Yeah.
earlier on about driving and how being inside the car can protect you
Mm-hmm.
against your manners. So being considerate to other road users is another
Yeah.
aspect of manners, isn't it?
It is, and it really, I really notice well-mannered drivers and ill-mannered drivers. That's quite British too, I think. I think generally in Britain, well, I mean, when I drove in Britain, it's been a long time, but I think that the drivers in Britain were quite well mannered. You know, like you take turns, you're quite patient. If you see a car signaling, you let the car in. And of course,
Not
that's very
not in
different
not
here
not
in
in
Spain.
not in
In
Essex.
Valencia, that's not, or not in Essex. Is that true? They don't do
Not
that,
where
do they not?
I'm from. No.
No, I mean,
Well,
well, I have to say it's a long time since I've driven in Britain, so I'm not really sure.
I think it
Uh-huh.
depends what part of the country, but I just remember being in like road rage. Road rage is where you get very, very angry when you're in a car
Mm-hmm.
and people do bad things when they're driving. That was a big problem growing up where I grew up on the outskirts of London. And fights would happen sometimes because
With
people
cars.
would
Uh-huh.
pull out and they wouldn't signal and they'd do something silly and there'd
Mm-hmm.
be literally I've seen fights in the streets because of bad driving. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's called road rage, isn't it? And they have
Road
air
rage.
rage too now, don't they? Because some people, when they travel on aeroplanes, they're also very bad mannered. They're too loud. They don't respect the noise levels in the cabin. And when the air stewards like remind them to try to be respectful towards other passengers, some of them, especially if they've drunk alcohol,
Yeah.
there's a new thing which is called air rage. Sometimes they get arrested when when the plane lands because
Yep.
they haven't behaved with manners on the flight.
Yeah, Claudia's from Argentina. I thought she was. Yeah, and she says
Okay,
it
Claudia.
depends on the country. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why we wanted to talk about this idea of manners, because it does vary from country to country, and people have different manners in different countries. Concha says she thinks that staring's not good manners in any country. No, I agree, Concha. But then again, it's interesting. There's some countries like Spain where you can hold the person's gaze for longer. And I notice this when I walk around the streets in Valencia. People look at me, I look at them. There's no aggression, there's no bad manners in just
Insane.
holding their gaze. Whereas in London, it could be a problem. So it's
And
interesting when
if
they
you
change.
think of some Asian countries too, I mean, I don't know if we've got any Japanese people listening, but I do believe that in Japan, it's not a thing to do. When I was only in Japan once, and I never had eye contact with anybody in Japan when you were walking along the street, because people
Yeah.
just didn't look at you.
They tend to look down, don't they, at
They
the street?
look down, or they look past you, or they look at your shoulders, but they don't look you in the eye.
Yes. Yes,
hmm
that's true.
hmm
Okay, on the subject of being on the road and looking at public transport, then, do you offer a seat to the elderly? That used to be good manners when I grew up, although it doesn't seem to happen very much here in Spain. I don't see many younger people offering seats to the elderly. You
They
have
well, they
well,
do, and I know that in the metro system in Valencia, they've got this new system where they actually have stickers with posters saying, "Please offer these seats to pregnant women, the elderly, or anybody who's disabled, or anybody with small children." But it's true that in Britain, people are more attuned to that. In Britain, when I was pregnant, and also in Germany, people would immediately get up and give me their seat, but in Valencia they didn't. So I think from the cultural perspective, it's very ingrained in us, isn't it, to give your seat to somebody, to be attentive if somebody needs your seat, to give it to them.
it was when I was growing up, but then when I was growing up on public transport, we didn't have those designated seats for the
Yeah,
elderly and
that's
the
true.
infirm.
Hmm
Now, on trams and trains and buses, you have seats for the
hmm
elderly, and that's where they sit. Whereas
hmm
when I grew up, we had to stand up, and we were
hmm
taught to stand up and offer our
Yeah,
seats.
of
Yeah.
course, always. Yeah. I think we're running out of time, Craig.
Oh, that went really, really quickly, didn't it?
There are so many things that we want to gripe about. That's the problem. We've been grinding our gears too much now
We have. Let's
for
see
an
if there's
hour.
any last minute comments before we say goodbye. Claudia says in El Cairo, it's considered an offense. What is considered an offense in El Cairo?
I think
Interesting.
that was
I wonder.
staring. I
Maybe,
think it was staring.
perhaps. And Claudia also says that young people are not polite enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
my parents used to say that about me when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a generational thing? Do we
Mm-hmm.
always criticize the younger generations? I don't know.
Possibly. I think manners evolve, don't they? And the problem is that you have your manners very, very deeply ingrained in yourself when you're young. And then you have those manners and you respond with offense, even though there's no offense intended. So it's like what you said with the writing, like times are changing and you have to change
Yeah.
with the times. But there's something in me that if somebody asks me a direct question without saying hello,
They don't know you. Yeah.
it's a guttural response. It's an instinctive response, but it's because it's been ingrained in me since I was a child. And of course, I think that's probably behind it. That's why old people always think the youngers are less. But it's just because we haven't, as we're getting older, we have to change and adapt, and we don't always at the same rhythm.
That's true. But if there's one takeaway from this, just remember that if you are speaking in English and you're in a situation like a job interview, for example, it's always safer. It's always better to be more formal than too informal. So always go to the side of formality and better manners, just to be on the safe side, and then you won't get into trouble. Anyway, the time went really quickly today. It's been lovely to be here. If you are interested in free courses to improve your English, go to manchesteringles.com. Lots of material there. And we apologize to people who have been waiting for the weekly, bi-weekly or bi-monthly, every 2 weeks, fortnightly, the newsletter. We've had problems with our email service, but we are working on that. That will be in your inbox very soon. Our podcast is at inglespodcast.com. And if you are interested in joining a conversation course that I run with a small group of lovely students, we're having a lovely time in our conversation group, send me an email, mansionteachers@yahoo.s, and I will send you information about the conversation courses.
Okay.
Lynne.
And I'm Lynne. My website is putitlikethis.com. If you're interested in online classes tailor-made to help you achieve your objectives, then you can go to my website and find out more, and you'll be able to get in touch with me too. But remember, if you write to me, say, hello, Lynne.
It was so nice to see you on the live stream.
It was so nice to see you on the live stream, because I will appreciate those kind of emails a little bit more than I'd be nicer to you.
Indirect question. I was wondering if you'd consider. Yeah. Okay, thanks for watching. Lynne, hopefully we'll be back in 2 weeks again. We'll do another one of these. And if I can, I will be back next Wednesday, probably by myself with something to help you with your English. We'll see. But keep watching Facebook, keep watching Twitter, and keep watching Facebook, and we will let you know what's happening. Take care and have a great week.
Okay, yes, bye-bye. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.